We're going to talk about connecting with the audience. And the absolute most important thing to know is when you're telling any kind of story, whether you're writing, whether you're doing LARP, whether you're making a film, the absolute key point to connecting with the audience is the use of emotion. You can have the cleverest plot in the whole world, that is the most intricately, logically, wonderfully intermeshed bit of thinking ever. And if nobody cares about any of the characters that you have in it, your plot will fail. The way you get people to care is you give them things to be emotional about. The emotions that drive people. If you're running a LARP, one of the great emotions to get to characters with is greed, because there might be treasure. Ooh, that is an instant hook. When you're talking about writing stories, though, you've got other emotions that you've got to get involved in, and based on what flavor, what genre of story you're writing, is the emotion that you're going to use is going to be adjusted for it. If you're writing horror, you're going to be wanting to build up suspense and tension and fear. If you're writing mystery, you're going to be wanting mystery is a lot of suspense and conjecture and curiosity is what you're trying to evoke. If you're writing action, then you're going to be wanting excitement. Romance is going to be love and lust. You can see what I'm saying. And the way that you get the people, the way that you get the reader, the way that you get the audience to care is you show the characters caring. You don't just say the character cared deeply about so and so. You show the character caring deeply about so and so. I could say, Murphy and Dresden were friends. But that is not going to get the audience nearly as much as showing Murphy and Dresden doing friend things. Supporting one another in dark moments, caring about one another when things are on the line, teasing one another when things are not incredibly vital, and generally behaving like friends do. So the way you do that is you have to understand how human emotions work and how people react to situations. Because where you really get the audience, you can write the greatest action scene in the world. But if you can't write the reaction of your characters to that scene, you can't get the audience. And that is the absolutely most critical portion of any story. If any of you have gone by my live journal, which is at jimbutcher.livejournal.com, I've got a bunch of basically just short lectures that are meant for aspiring writers. So if you're a newbie writer, go to jimbutcher.livejournal.com. There's a bunch of lectures there for it. And what I'm going to cover today is the stuff that's covered in the lecture. It's called sequel structure. Sequel, not this is what happened in the second part of the story, but sequel as in this is what happens sequentially. This is what comes next. The action's over and what comes next, because this is where you connect with the audience. So you've just done, okay, we're going to take a typical human reaction to a fairly common trauma, a car accident. Okay, you've just been in a minor car accident, not one where everybody's dead, but a fender bender, screech, crunch, and you're in that moment immediately after. Now the car accident, that can happen to anybody, but where it connects is where it gets emotional, and so you have to understand the psychological process that comes along with that kind of trauma, with that kind of event. And the first thing that happens, the absolute first thing that happens in any event like that is there is an emotional reaction. It happens before you get to do logic. It is where your instincts come from. It comes from your brain stem. And the first thing that happens is you have that immediate, unthinking, completely id-driven animal reaction to whatever it was that just went on. So in the wake of your accident, you might be feeling terror. You might be feeling feeling furious. That was mine. I can't believe that. Although it was my fault. You might be feeling some other emotion. But the first thing that happens is you get an emotional reaction. So as you're portraying it, as you're writing it, that's what you've got to show them. Is the first thing that happens is you've got to show that emotion. And again, you can't just tell people about the emotion. You've got to show it in action in your character. I think one of the easiest examples to use is to go out of the writing medium, to go into acting, for example. You look at Ian McKellen's portrayal of Gandalf in The Lord of the Rings, and there are all these moments in Lord of the Rings where people go, "Oh God, Ian McKellen is awesome!" And if you go back and watch him, every single one of those moments is him displaying that moment of emotion in reaction to a situation that just happened. You know, to the ring, to him to walking in and finding the ring on the floor, to Frodo standing up saying, "I will take the ring to Mordor," and seeing his reaction to Faramir being sent off to die with all the Knights of Gondor. And you've got that moment where Gandalf is there just stricken by the futility and despair of it. And those are all examples of a great actor. That's great acting because he's connecting with the audience, because he's showing us those emotions. Okay? So emotion, first thing that happens. Now, immediately after your emotional reaction, "Oh my God, I can't believe I just survived that." Okay? Your emotional reaction, you're shaking, and your adrenaline is up. Then it's only after that your intellect starts to kick in, and your reason starts to tell you things. All right? So your reason will tell you things like, "Oh my God, that was totally your fault." Your reason will tell you things like, "Check yourself, see if you're bleeding or if there are any metal parts that are sticking through you." Your reason tells you stuff like that. So your reason gets involved at that point. So remember, when you're writing reactions, first emotion, then reason, and your reason will tell you things. After your reason starts in, you'll start analyzing the situation. Okay, what's happening? Where's his car? Where's my car? Is anybody over there hurt? Does he need a doctor? Do I need a doctor? And so directly from reason follows the next stage of writing reaction, which is writing review, where your character will go over what just happened and try and figure out what it means. So emotion, reason, review. You're trying to figure out, okay, I just got in this crash. Oh my God, this just happened. Is everybody alive? Yes. Oh my God, there's no way I'm going to make it to work on time. That's one of those where you start reviewing what the action that you've just had is going to mean for you and anticipating what's going to happen in the future because of it. Oh my God, I don't have insurance.
Yes.
Oh my God, he doesn't have insurance. That's the kind of thing that happens. So emotion, reason, review. And then the next thing you write, the next thing that happens is a decision. You have to decide how you're going to act. Okay, so after all of that, that's when, what do? Okay, get out of the car, make sure everybody's safe. All right, I get out of the car. Is everybody all right? Do we need to call an ambulance? No. Okay, good. We don't need an ambulance, but okay, we got to call a cop. My cell phone's out of juice. Do you have a cell phone? That's where you start making decisions, start making choices about how to act. Now, in classic writing structure, then what that does is now that you've gone through this reaction, whatever it is that just happened, your character has decided to do something, and since you've decided to do something, it means you've got a new goal. Typically in writing structure, you've got scenes where things happen, and the first thing that starts in a scene is your character has a goal and you go after it. And then as you're going through the scene, things go horribly. The character goes after the goal, but things go horribly wrong, and then your character has to react to things going horribly wrong, and that's the car wreck. And then you start the sequel. So you can go through an entire story just writing scene sequel, back to back like that. It's not how you pace a story, but you can do a story that way. You will have a story that people understand. The strongest reason for using sequel structure, as I've laid it out here, is because that is the natural order in which the human brain goes through things. That's how psychology works. You hit something and there's a horrible situation. You react to it emotionally. Your brain kicks in. And you start figuring out how to make things work, and then you figure out what you're going to do next and start on that next action. And if you can do that, you will always be showing your reader your character's reasoning, your character's intent, your character's motivation for what they're doing, and that's how you connect with them. Now, the most important part of doing that, in my opinion, is showing the emotion, because that's the guts of it. That's where you make people laugh. That's where you make people cry. But generally speaking, that's where you do it, is in that sequel. It's not in the part of the story where action scenes happen. It's in the part between the action scenes where your characters get to react to the horrible things that you've just done to them. So really, it's pretty much that simple. It's one of those things that is simple but not easy, like getting the engine block lifted out of a car. That's simple. It just isn't easy. But it's something that you have to practice, and you have to consciously practice it. So the way that you do it is, before you start writing a part of your book where where you're going to be going through that reaction, just write emotion and colons, and then write what emotions your character needs to be feeling. Write reason, and start bringing up the points of logic of the story that your character will need to be going over to move your story forward. Write review, and then you can start anticipating, having your character understanding why this just happened, anticipating what's going to happen as a consequence of it, and then decision, and what your character decides to do as a result of his reaction to the situation. It doesn't always have to be, he doesn't always have to go leaping off to be a superhero, when you get to that decision. Sometimes the only decision your character can make is, oh my god, I've got to keep going anyway. Not that I ever do that to anyone in any of my books. But that's the structure you use. And again, if you go by jimbutcher.livejournal.com, there's a whole little lecture on that's on there to cover it. So I saw one hand already. So
one of the things that you in particular do well, that I think is even harder, is to make us sympathetic somewhat to your villains. Mab, Harry's godmother, other character, Marcone, yeah. I mean, and that, how do you do that and not, you want them to still be the villain, you want it to be sort of a love-hate relationship. How do you do that?
I try and build my villains by making them as close a relative as I possibly can to my hero in almost every respect. And then giving them a wildly different goal as a result of whatever that small difference is. When you write your villains, you got to bear in mind, nobody thinks he's the villain. The villain does not know he's the villain. The villain thinks he is the hero of his story. The villain thinks he's a protagonist, and generally that your hero is some idiot getting in the way. But that's the main thing, and also the main thing to do with your villain is you never write a villain that is just cartoonishly wholly bleh. You never try and write your villain like a big cartoon villain. You try and write your villain who has cool redeeming qualities. If your villain just did one thing a little bit differently, he would be awesome. But he doesn't do that one thing a little bit differently, and that's what makes him a villain. And that, for me, that's where I try and write about, hey, this is the difference that your choices make. This is, the things that you choose to do is what makes you a good guy or a bad guy. Villains don't necessarily have to be, brave and cowardly. You can have completely courageous villains. There have been completely courageous villains in the history of this world. Yeah, I mean, that's the main thing. Give them points that are admirable. You always give, even if the villain is a complete monster, you give him one thing that is admirable. Even if it's nothing but strength. Yes.
So you're talking about building drama with emotion. How do you find the line between drama and melodrama? Because I've seen so many writers tip over that edge.
Right. How do you find the line between drama and melodrama?
How do you not end up alienating your reader because you've...
I'll tell you the answer, but you're not going to like it. Word count. How much time do you spend on the emotion versus the action? If you find yourself spending 2 or 3 times as much time on the reaction as you do on the action, that's when you're getting into greater and greater levels of drama. If you feel you're getting too melodramatic, back off on the frickin' emotion and reaction. You're writing too much of it. On the other hand, depending what genre you're writing, for instance, if you're writing in romance, you're going to spend all kinds of time on that because that's what it's for, and that's what your audience wants. If you're writing an action story, if you're writing an epic fantasy, and you feel it's getting too melodramatic, cut down the word count on your emotional reaction scenes. Get those conversations a little bit shorter and get on with the story, because that's the problem with melodrama, is you're wallowing in that emotion.
Follow
Follow up. Okay, then we'll get you next.
up? Before you give your story to your beta readers, other than word count, is there a litmus test that you use when reviewing it to tell yourself, have I hit my mark? Am I off my mark?
Okay, before I give my story to the beta readers, do I give myself a litmus test before I give it to them? The beta readers get my story one chapter at a time. They're a live audience. So I'll finish off a chapter and I will send it out to them, and there they go. And then I will gauge. My beta readers basically have a form to fill out. It's pretty simple. What did you like about this chapter? What did you dislike about this chapter? Do you have any questions or comments? And that's the reaction. And then I judge if my chapter is doing what I want it to do based on their reactions. Now, their reactions are, they'll have questions or comments, and sometimes the point of that chapter was to make them ask questions. In which case, you didn't tell us this, you didn't tell us that, and if the point was to make them ask that question, then I just get to giggle, because that's what I wanted to do. But if I've made some huge hole in it or something like that, if I've left a huge gaping point of logic in there, then I've got to know that so that I can address it. Also, if they're unclear about exactly what's going on in the chapter, then I know that I have not outlined my character's goals, my character's motivations well. If they're unclear about why somebody is acting the way they are, and then again, I've got to go back and hit their motivation. 90% of everything is motivation. As long as your characters have got a clear motivation, everything else is going to follow out of that. But yeah.
One of my other favorite authors is Lois McMaster Bujold.
Oh, Lois! I want, professionally speaking, of course, I want to have her babies. I think she's one of the most skilled writers alive at integrating plot and world and character and story and getting them all in one piece that you just can't separate. And that is a mystical power, and I want it.
Well, she said something that meshes with what you're saying here, is that whenever she's writing a story and she gets to a point where she's stuck, she doesn't know what she needs to do next to get to the next major plot element, she asks herself, what is the worst thing that I can do to my character right now? And does it, because that gives the character something to react to.
That is always a handy thing to do. What is the worst thing I could do to my character? What does my character fear the most? What does my character hate the most? Have that show up. Listen, this is not stuff for the faint of heart, people. You've got to have a little bit of the sadist in you to be a good writer. And if you do it right, if you torture your characters properly, yeah, I said it. If you do that properly, your audience will love it. They will. The audience will be happy with what you are doing. Here's something that my writing teacher told me that was one of the things that made me think she did not know what she was talking about. She could not possibly know what she was talking about because I did not agree with this. And she said, writing is the business of professionally manipulating another person's emotions. And she's absolutely right. If you can write the story that makes the reader laugh when you want them to laugh, and makes them cry when you want them to cry, makes them hate who you want them to hate, and cheer for who you want them to cheer for, they will love you for writing a story that does that. And that's, as a writer, that is your job. And the way you do that is to get them to care about the characters. If they care about the characters, if they invest in the characters, then after that, you can do all kinds of stuff and they will go with it. You can drop frozen turkeys from overhead airplanes onto vampires and kill them with them. And they'll go, yeah, okay, I can go with that. And that is the most cartoony, ridiculous thing ever. And yet, you can sell it if you get it.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah, exactly. What else we got as far as questions go?
How do you find that balance between when you have a new mythos that you're bringing in, or when you have a mythos, how do you find that balance between mixing in what you want and making it your own, and not changing it to the degree that people that are a fan of that mythos won't like the changes?
So when you're bringing something new in and you're changing stuff around, when you're doing your own vampires, for example, how do you muck with the standard vampire without making standard vampire fans upset? And the question isn't how do you do it without making them upset. It's how do you do it without making the majority of them upset, because you're not going to be able to avoid upsetting somebody, period. Somebody will always be upset with you, trust me. Even if it's the people who come to you and say, I'm a member of the real White Council and we don't like what you're doing very much. Which has happened to me. Yeah, a little bit. On the other hand, I guess I could expose them. So, I must have power. I don't know. Yeah, the issue, don't worry about not upsetting people. Worry about writing the story that you love.
Well, yeah, it's more how do you make that change without having people go, oh, come on, or, that no longer looks like what.
Okay, standard rule of thumb, and this is the rule of thumb this is a rule of thumb that you can use anywhere for any kind of fantasy. Okay? Whenever you're trying to introduce something new, but you want people to buy it as something real, introduce two common elements, two stable, common, real elements for every one odd one that you're throwing in. So, for example, and this is not my rule. This is Mark Twain's rule for fantasy. This is something that I read that he wrote. So, I've got a wizard who lives in an apartment and drives a Volkswagen. Wizard, apartment, Volkswagen. Okay, it's like there's two things here that are normal. The wizard thing, yeah, I guess I can come along for the ride. But if you outweigh the new and strange with a couple elements of familiar, then it's gonna sell to people. Especially if the elements of new and strange kind of suck. Like there's a downside that nobody told you about. He's a wizard and can't use any electronics. It's like, okay, that is something that you can readily buy because he's got all these superpowers. Well, none of that comes for free. You don't ever get that for free. What's the catch? Oh, he can't play video games. Ooh. I'm writing for a nerd audience. That is wrong.
The hot showers thing too.
Yeah, no hot showers? Come on! My gosh. I had all these people writing me for the longest time. He can get a wood burning water heater that you can buy him right here. Look, here's a link to it online. Yeah, exactly. You can't get on the net to buy it. If only he knew about these things. Yeah. Somebody else should go get it for him. Or he could talk to the various paraneters. Go talk to the paranetizen. But anyway, yeah.
Is that part of building the emotional connection? Is the fact that you're reinforcing in tiny ways his suffering to make him more of a noble character?
It's not necessarily reinforcing his suffering that makes him a noble character. It's pointing out that he has to deal with things that suck in life, like everybody else. That makes him like somebody you maybe know. Harry's got at least as much issues as my friend who can't eat, gluten, egg, dairy, cheese, or trout.
Holy crap.
You go out and eat with them, and it's a process. It's a trial. Every time you go out to eat somewhere, they've got to be quizzing the waiters and the chef and so on. And that's it. That's a serious thing, and that's just like a friend that I know, or my friend who was a serious asthmatic, and not like asthma like, hey, I need to hit my inhaler, but asthma like, hey, I need to hit the emergency room, that kind of asthma. Everybody knows somebody like that.
What were their superpowers?
What was that?
What were their superpowers?
The asthma person had the ability to see, had vision so sharp that she could see fishing line that was strung across the trail as traps at our lark from like 40 or 50 yards away. Yeah, I actually saw her charge from one encounter to the next encounter because she'd seen the fishing line of the traps, and she actually led the orcs into the traps because the orcs hadn't been to that encounter and they didn't know. So she hopped over the fishing line, and the orcs got to eat the trap instead. It was kind of awesome. But it's not so much you're making a character suffer that establishes it, as you're establishing more than just my wizard is awesome, my wizard is awesome, my wizard is awesome. It's more my wizard is normal, my wizard is normal, my wizard is normal. Things go to hell. Awesome! And you save them. That's another one of the things that you do is when you're writing your fictional tough guy, your fictional hero, your fictional protagonist. If they're the heroic character who is going to be standing up and being awesome to bad guys at some point, you've got to understand the mentality of people who are awesome to bad guys in real life. And those guys, they don't do a lot of talking about how awesome they are. They really don't, for the most part. The guys who can absolutely flatten you are generally some of the nicest and most polite guys. And you won't really know that most of them can absolutely flatten you unless they want to let you know that they can. I'm telling you, the real tough guys have no need to demonstrate it at all because they know they've got it. They don't have to pull it out on anybody. And to a degree, you need some of those same characteristics. You need to study those people so that you can bring some of those characteristics into your character. Again, you don't have to make them exactly like somebody, but it's helpful if you know somebody like that. Talk to somebody who is a professional bouncer, who is a professional martial artist, who is a soldier, and those guys. And generally, they're happy to hang out with you. They're some of the friendliest people I know. I once studied at a dojo that had working out at it at the same time. The current world record holder for the world's strongest man, Shane Hammond. There was a professional heavyweight boxer. The guy who ran the school was a judo expert who was in the Martial Arts Hall of Fame more time than Bruce Lee and won the last Open Kumite tournament in the Orient, or excuse me, Asia. I know I can't say the Orient. I was confused by that, but apparently I can't. So
was I when that was explained to me.
Yeah.
That helps.
Why can't you say it?
Apparently it's not correct. You have to say Asia now.
One is rugs and one is people. But that's what my
Exactly.
wife
That was
told
that.
me,
You could
so-
say Oriental rug, but not Oriental person. I don't know why. But I'm like, okay, whatever. Let's see. My instructor, who was merely a second Dan black belt, who happened to have learned from a guy who had developed his martial art as a street fighting martial art. It was really nasty one. There was lots of kick him in the knee, stomp on the foot type of maneuvers built into it. And he was the least dangerous guy there. But there were people there who were alternates on the Olympic judo team. There was this one guy that I knew that I thought he was just the skinniest proof I'd ever seen, and he was a 6th-degree master of Wing Chun, man. I saw him work out on the Wing Chun dummy one day, and oh my God, that guy had the most incredible hands. He was so fast and strong. And let me tell you, that was the friendliest place I've ever been in my life because you never knew who could just utterly lay you out in that dojo. So everybody was nice. And that was a room full of that. I mean, that was just constantly a room full of badasses, and nobody had to say anything about it. There was never any posturing. There was never any posing there. It was a pretty cool place. But anyway. But yeah, that's something to study in your characters, and when you're writing a villain, you got to study the mentality of bullies and how they behave, and that was something that I unfortunately had a lot of experience with. I had the bad taste to be the smallest kid in my class and the smartest kid in my class, and it's possible I might have had a little bit of a mouth on me. And yeah, shockingly, because that's when you get done with the lesson a little bit early, you've got a lot of time to think of comebacks to the guy that you know is going to give you a hard time in a few minutes. And,
We've never heard of anyone like that.
yeah, I got beat up a lot when I was a kid. I learned all about how to hop over fences without slowing down. I learned all about how to avoid places where I knew people were going to ambush me and how to look for ambush sites. I learned all about how to get on my bicycle and ride it really fast. And yet, despite being a very elusive target, I probably got beat up every couple of weeks growing up. Until one day, a kid, when I was in 7th grade, I was out of the bike rack getting my bike to go home, and the kid that came to beat me up pulled a knife on me. And I knew that was serious, and I freaked out. And I had a perfectly good weapon to hand right there. I had my bike chain, but I didn't use that. I started hitting him with my bike. screaming at the top of my lungs, and when he started running, I chased him with my bike. And after that, I didn't get beat up anymore. I never had to fight again because I was the crazy kid.
Wait,
So that-
people deny on you and you're crazy?
After that, but I never had to fight anymore because the next time people started getting tough with me, I was able to look at that person and say, you know what, I know I can stand up to you, and that's what changes things. And people who are bullies are, who are gonna get in your face and who are gonna be physically aggressive on you. For the most part, they are not ready. Okay, there are exceptions to be made, but for the most part, they are not ready. They're not prepared for somebody to stand up to them and back them down, and they're not willing to do it either. That's just kind of basic predator behavior in all throughout the animal world. As the predators go after the weak, and if you look like you might not be weak, they don't generally like to mess with you. There are exceptions to be made to that rule, of course, and you don't want to find one of those guys, but for the most part.
So, moving over to Codex Alera for a minute.
Okay.
When you started writing that series, touted as a child, and it goes through, until he's an adult.
It's a fantasy series. It starts off with a boy on a farm. I didn't make the rules.
So, but when you're writing a child protagonist, do you have to approach things differently to not lose your audience?
You do. You have to make them not a child at the earliest opportunity. And whether that's by having them grow up or by putting them in a situation where there are no adults to help, you make them not the child. Because if they're the child, they're not going to get anything done, or else they're going to be behaving in a very illogical and inconsistent manner for your reader. So the Harry Potter series work because Harry and friends are not children most of the time. Most of the time, they are operating all by themselves without the support of adults. In fact, adults are usually getting in the way. But they are not functionally children as parts of the story goes. They're only children, and they're children in name only. Kids in name only, kainos. Yeah.
So, question as far as...
Oh God, I love that shirt on you, man.
Ironically, it's appropriate for me. The question I have is, as you progressed as a writer, what have you learned about time management? Where has time management changed for you as to where you put your energy into actual creative writing, going back and changing stuff, dealing with business? How does this world change for you now?
The business thing intrudes more and more on my writing time and more importantly on my writing headspace. Because generally I've always got the next thing that I'm working on is kind of I'm playing with the pieces in my head and always pushing them around and trying to figure out how to make it come out right. When suddenly you've got to stop and we need an author biography. Okay, well now I've got to write something else new. Oh, we need a summary of the next two books in the steampunk series. I haven't even considered what the next two. Okay, fine, here we go. As all that stuff gets in, it pushes more and more, and that's why I've taken more and more to writing to doing all my work at night when nobody's going to be calling me and asking me to do stuff. Generally speaking, I've tried to focus on working smarter instead of longer. If I can get myself in the right frame of mind, I can rip off an awful lot of work in a very short time. If I just have to sit down and slog it out at the keyboard, because as a writer, sometimes you have to do that. You have to sit down at the keyboard even when it sucks to type every letter and get it done. But when I'm slogging it out at the keyboard, I'm lucky if I average 250 or 300 words an hour when I'm just grinding it out. If I get myself in the right mindset and sit down and get it done, I can do 2,700 words an hour. And I mean, that's like a furious hour and a half, at the end of which I need to wander around quietly for a while. But I get so much more work done that it's totally worth it. So, getting the right mindset, whatever you need to do to get yourself into the right frame of mind for the writing, do that. For me, it happens to be video games. So, if I need to do a couple hours worth of video games for my art, then That is what needs to happen. And if those things are inspirational, then they're also tax deductible as far as my business is concerned. So,
Which video games?
right now I do a lot of League of Legends, Battlefield 3, and Champions Online.
Wait, but actually tax deductible?
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Anything that is inspirational material for you for your work is considered to be a tax deductible expense in the creative industries. So movies, books, music, that kind of thing. It's kind of one of those nifty little side benefits.
How much rewriting do you have to do? I mean, you can say you put all these words, but
How much rewriting do I have to do? The way my writing process works is I write chapter by chapter. I sit down and that's my work unit is I need to get a chapter done. And I can't sit down to write the chapter until I've got it, until I know how it's going to be laid out in my head. Once I've got it puzzled out in my mind, and it's all the pieces click together, then it's like, boom, okay, now I've got it, get it written down. The hard part is getting it put together. Sometimes it takes me a day or 2 days to figure out how the chapter is going to look. But once I've got it pictured in my mind, then I can do it. I'm sort of the writer version of one of those Japanese painters that sits down and stares at the painting and stares at the paper and stares at the paper and stares at the paper, and then takes his brush and goes, horse. Like that. That's kind of what I do. That's kind of how I work as a writer. So my rewriting is generally very, very light. I'll send stuff, and the folks who've read beta for me, they can tell you the stuff that I rewrite is usually is like plot holes that I find. Occasionally there will be grammar mistakes or word transpositions that my word editor didn't catch because I got the word I inserted a different correctly spelled word that was not correct. But I'll fix that stuff, and if they find a plot hole, then I'll fix that. But otherwise, I'll get that done, and I won't mess with it too much. I'll get it off to the editor. I think I'm one of the folks who thinks that rewriting too much is not good for you. Other writers will completely disagree with me on that. If you go to Rothfuss is a rewrite guy. And he'll rewrite things, until the cows come home. That's his process. That's how he talks to his muse. It's not how I talk to mine. But not that mine ever talks to me or calls or writes. She's off on the island somewhere. She only shows up when I play video games. So.
I have a question about genres and subgenres. Urban fantasy is a relatively young genre.
It is.
How do you get into this without being compared to other people? We're writing a story that's urban fantasy mystery, and if we start talking about the character, people go, oh, like Dresden.
Right.
Even though he's nothing like Dresden.
Right. Yeah, it's hard. When I was putting the Dresden Files together, my writing teacher told me, you can't set this in Kansas City. And I said, why not? And she says, you're already walking close enough to Laurel Hamilton's toes that you don't need to set it in Missouri, too. So pick a different city. And I'm like, where? She says, I don't care. A different city, not Missouri. And even though I've been using Kansas City because I grew up there, and so that was where my points of reference were, so I changed it. And I moved Dresden to Chicago. How's Chicago? Chicago's fine. Whatever, use that. Seriously.
didn't you have to go visit there to make sure you got all the landmarks?
No. No, I eventually did go. I didn't go until after, I think, proven guilty. But I think after the third book came out, it was when I started building contacts that were in Chicago, and so I was able to to get online and say, hey guys, Chicago crowd, I need to know this. What can you tell me about that? And I would get answers like, oh, I drive by that cemetery on my way to work. I'll take some pictures on my phone and email them to you. And I'd be like, I love nerds. And now I'll use Chicago Street View. I just wrote a scene where I had a monster kick a car in front of somebody, and kick a parked car in front of somebody in a scene, and I had problems getting Java to work on my computer, and I didn't stop to research it. I just wrote it, and then I went back to research it to check it up, and realized that there's a no parking section along that entire strip of the street, and I can't have a parked car on Michigan Avenue right there. So I got to use something else, and I got on Google Street View and started looking around. It's like, oh, look at these planters of the size of hot tubs. We can use one of these. Yeah, that'll work just as well. Because they have these giant stone planters there, and I'll be happy to use that. And And it's to the point where Google Street View works so well to this point, and Google Earth, and all the different satellite services you can use. That when I wrote the story The Warrior, where the misguided priest kidnaps one of Michael's kids and takes her prisoner on this roof, and is holding her up there, and has put a number of streetlights out so that whoever comes up will be illuminated, and the light will be blocking whoever's looking up. And I actually had, when I was in Chicago, I had a Chicago SWAT officer come up to me and say, "Hey, listen, I need to know who you talked to about this to set this up, because this is the kind of information that really somebody bad could use, and we kind of like to keep track of people with this sort of knowledge." And I said, "Dude, I got on Google Street Maps, and I used it, and I just sort of figured it out." He's like, "You did it by yourself?" I said, "No." He said, "Just all by yourself, just using the thing on Google that anybody can get to?" I said, "Huh?" He goes, "I hate the internet." So, but yeah, I mean, I love the internet. But anyway, so yeah, that.
Is there a reason you chose Chicago as opposed to, say, Sunnydale, someday?
I chose Chicago because there was a globe on my teacher's desk when she told me that, and there were 4 cities in America on the globe that were marked. And one of them was New York, which I did not want to use because the superheroes have got that place all sewn up. And one was DC, which I did not want to use because you're going to write something in DC, you've got to write politics. And you write politics, you lose half your audience right there. I mean, it doesn't matter what you write, somebody's going to be mad at you. LA was on there, and I didn't want to use LA because I didn't want to get Hollywood with it. Because you write stuff in LA, you've got to use Hollywood. And that left Chicago. So I said, "How about Chicago?" And he said, "Yeah, fine, whatever, use that." But that was how it worked out. And it turned out it was just a great idea, but that I just stupidly stumbled into, which has been the story of my career, really. So remember, whenever you run into a problem, it's not a problem, it's an opportunity for you to discover something awesome. Generally speaking, when you've got a problem in a book, you don't actually have a problem. You've got an opportunity looking at you, you just haven't realized it yet. You can always make something cool happen. Even if you think, "Oh, it's impossible, I'm in a corner." You're not in a corner. You've got an opportunity to make your hero look awesome getting out of that corner, and that's what that is. But
yeah, so those sort of blocks are when you go from normal to doing your awesome as a writer.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, although I really don't believe in writer's block per se. That's something that my teacher taught me. She taught us a mantra. She says, your writer's blocks are for professors and for people who already have lots of money and don't need to make a living. Is what she taught us. So those people can have writer's blocks, and that's okay. You want to be professional writers, so everybody repeat after me. I don't have a muse. I have a mortgage. Because sometimes that's just the attitude you have to have. Don't worry about being blocked. Worry about not getting your writing done, because that's more important. Also, what I found is a lot of times when I write, and even when I'm writing that grinding 250 words an hour, that I'm not enjoying myself and I'm having a terrible time, getting this part of the story written. I'll get done and look back at the story and be reading back over it before I send it off, and I won't be able to tell which parts I wrote in super high flow state mode and which parts I wrote in nose to the grindstone mode. Because I've practiced, and because my attitude is not this sucks, but I've got to get this done, this is my job. So really, I mean, that's another thing you need to carry with you if you want to break in as a writer. You've got to have that attitude of professionalism, and it's really hard to have that attitude when nobody's paying you any money. But you've got to cultivate that, and you've got to develop that for yourself as a writer in order to convince people to pay you money.
I thought the same place from whence your idea that rewriting too much is bad for you.
That's probably the same place where the rewriting too much is bad for you thing, because it makes you more late. Editors don't like that. They're very unhappy with that. They've got these mystical thing called calendars, and the calendar says that the book needs to be there that day. And if you have not consulted calendar properly, you can be in trouble.
So you don't believe in rewrites. Do you have some idea then where the story is going to end up at the end? Because what happens if those early, like something happens towards the end that doesn't work with the beginning, that doesn't jive with the beginning?
I always know where the story's going to end when I write it. I always know where it's going to begin, where it's going to end. I know a pretty good, big, flashy spot in the middle to get me there, and then I know a bunch of other little things that I want to happen along the way. I don't need to know what's going to happen immediately next, as long as I know the general direction I'm going, and as long as I know that what I've written is getting me closer to that general direction. It's kind of like going on a car trip across the country. You need to know you're going. I'm going to drive from Kansas City to Los Angeles. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is get on I-70 West, and I'm going to start driving I-70 West. As long as I'm going westward, I'm going to be going more or less the right direction. And I don't need to know absolutely every step. As long as I've got the headlights on, I can see immediately what's in front of me, and I know where my general direction is. I'm good. Yeah.
So when you're writing two different series, like when you were writing Codex Solera and Harry, how hard is it to keep the two different characters' voices unique?
It's not hard. It wasn't hard for me because the Dresden Files was written first person, and the Codex was written third person. For that, it was more keeping the voices unique was more about writing each individual character in a Lara. That was more difficult than switching back and forth because it was a totally different gear. What's more, it was just such a relief because I could stop putting up with this Dresden lunatic for a while, and because you spend too much time with the guy. You readers, you pick up the book and you read it and you're done in like an hour and a half. And it's like, okay, that was 7 months of my life. Thank you. When's the next one? I can't believe you just said that. I mean, soon. So for me, it was relief to get to the fantasy series where I've had these other characters and I had so many different options available to me as a storyteller because I had all these different viewpoints, and so I could present stories from different points of view. And you can use things like characters not knowing what's going on to make even though the audience does know what's going on, in order to make the audience dread what's about to happen. That's Giles walking up the stairs, following the trail of roses up the stairs to find his calendar. That was a horrible scene, but that was because he was playing that as he thought he was in a romance novel, and he wasn't. He was in a horror novel. But he didn't know it. The audience did, and you can only do that when you've got multiple viewpoints. You can't really do that as a in a first person thing. You pretty much got to hit the walls head on one at a time, telling a first person story.
So the steampunk series is simultaneous with Dresden?
Well, I'm writing it. I'm writing a Dresden. I'll write a Dresden and steampunk, a Dresden and steampunk, like that. Yeah. I got about 80% of the first steampunk book written. And as soon as I finish as soon as I finish Skin Game, then I'll wrap up the steampunk novel over November and December, and get that in, and then I'll probably start the next steampunk immediately after that.
Have you talked to any about the steampunk at all? I haven't heard anything about it really.
I've talked a little bit about it. You can probably find some about it online. It's basically Hornblower meets League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. I would say Hornblower meets X-Men, but League of Extraordinary Gentlemen sounds so much more steampunk. It's not really. I hesitate to call it a steampunk. It's more a steam opera, but I didn't want to try and go and invent a new genre, so steampunk seems about right. But there's airships and crystal technology and steam, and people wear goggles. So how much more steampunk can you get than that? I actually think it's kind of a science fiction story, but everybody assures me it isn't.
Steampunk is science fiction?
Oh.
It's just Victorian science?
Right. But there's sentient cats, there's talking cats. Everybody lives in these the world is covered, the world they live in is covered in mist. And there is absolutely savage country between the spires. And the spires are these enormous 2 mile tall, 2 mile across cylinders. Where people live, kind of one city stacked on top of another, and all contact between the spires and all trade between the spires is done by airship, and because the surface is just an absolutely deadly and savage place to be, you don't want to be there. But the spires are also inhabited by sentient cats who kind of live in the shadows, and the cats are as smart as people, and they don't speak English except when they do. And they don't understand English except when they do. And but yeah, you got to take the cats seriously, because even though they're just cats, they have opposable thumbs and matches. So, the cats will show up and be like, I see that your warehouse is rodent-free. Perhaps you would like your warehouse to continue being rodent-free. Perhaps there will be some cream waiting out for me and my associates this evening. That's kind of where they fit in. But there's various portions of society we just have to read it. It's a big old mess. But I'm having a lot of fun with it, and the beta readers have given me a much stronger reaction to it than some of the Dresden Files books I've done. So, it's fun stuff.
In making Harry's world true to us, do you have a hard time with what's real and what's not real, like all these lizards and vampires and everything, and the belief system that Harry has and everything? Does it conflict any with reality in your own life?
Well, a lot of it's make-believe. It's not what I write for Harry. What I write for the characters there is separate from from the way I think things are. As far as that goes, though, I don't really have any trouble with it. The important thing is to get into the story and create the reality for that story. As long as you've got something that hangs together pretty well and that your characters believe in it, that's the important thing. Is that your characters have got to believe in it. Your characters have got to look at it and buy it as if it was something in the real world. And if you can get people invested in your characters and your characters are buying it, then people will go along with them. The White Council, they're jerks, but they're absolutely necessary. It's like, okay, I've got the same attitude about my government. So it's like, I can make that real enough that people go, yeah, I get what you're saying.
Can you talk a little bit about the comics?
Okay, I can talk about the comics. What do you want to hear about?
How did that come about?
They said, do you want to do comic books? And I said, I want comic books. I want somebody to draw the characters that are in my brain. Do I get to tell them how to draw? Yes, you do. Awesome! And we went through many iterations with the first artist for Harry and for Murphy and for the characters who appeared there. And until finally we got the characters ironed out. So if you ever read Welcome to the Jungle, those are actually the closest representations of the characters as they appear in my head that I've seen so far. That was the first one. That was the one that I actually wrote the script for. And let me tell you, writing comic scripts is hard. It is. They're different. It's just hard. Every picture's worth 1,000 words, and you've got 6 pictures on every page, and I had to write 1,000 words. And and they come and tell you things like, you can't have people talk this much, Jim. I'm like, why not? Well, because we have to draw it on the page, and if they talk this much, we won't be able to see anybody. So I've actually got some of my tightest, most Parker-esque prose, in the comic books. When Harry is trading threats back and forth with one of the hags in disguise. And I was actually kind of proud of that because it took me hours and hours to write, this little half a dozen 2 or 3 word exchange, in order for it to make sense.
On a nuts and bolts approach, how do you keep track of your ideas? I mean, do you have a little notepad or something where you're walking around?
I've got my college notepad that where I did my initial outline for the series on, and I'm just sticking with that because it seems to be working. So it's one of those, if it's not broke, don't fix it things. As far as keeping track of what's happened in the series and what's going on in the series, I'll go to the fan wiki at this point. How many kids do Michael and Charity have? Where's the fan wiki? Oh, there they all are. Okay. There's so many of them, it's almost as bad as my sister's kids. I can't keep track of those people either.
Not necessarily a specific series, but just generally walking around and you see something that sparks your imagination. It's like, quick, whip out my notebook and go, yeah, I like that idea. Maybe I can use it somewhere.
My philosophy is, if it's a strong enough idea, I won't need to write it down. It'll kick off something it'll start a fire and keep burning. So I don't know if that's a smart philosophy or not, because obviously I've probably let several ideas slip and I don't even remember them. But on the other hand, I have had several ideas that I thought were awesome at the time, and I wrote them down, and when I went back and looked at them later, I was like, okay, that's just stupid. I thought it was great at the time, but no, it was actually just dumb. I didn't realize it. You always, as the writer, you've got to be very focused on reason and not let your own emotions carry you away too much into when you're making your decisions from the perspective of this is my idea, this is my story, I've got to frame this, I've got to build this house and get this framed. That has to be solid. You don't get emotional until you've got your frame up, and then you're starting to do the finish work, and that's when you let your emotions go. But how are we for time?
We're done.
We're done.
We're done? Okay, we're done.